Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Artists Beyond the Studio, a series of artist talks conceived during lockdown and featuring artist members and associates of Graphic Studio Dublin. This is the 18th talk of the series, and I'm very pleased to be talking to our own Susan Early today. So let me start by introducing my esteemed friend and colleague, Susan Early, to you all. Susan is an architect and artist, and she also works at Graphic Studio Dublin as administrator and company secretary, where, among other things, she liaises with members, arranges studio talks and visits, oversees studio exhibitions, and champions the education programme. I have no idea where she finds the time for it all. Susan makes etchings, dry points, and makuhanga woodblock prints, and her work often focuses on elements of the built environment and how it impacts on and is influenced by the natural environment. Fragments of the city, from doorways and Georgian streets to glass houses and industrial sites, are depicted in Susan's intricate and keenly observed pieces. They draw our attention to the shadows cast on a railing or the detail of brickwork on a facade, highlighting these features and how they were made. The history of a landscape is something that recurs in the work. Dolmens, lighthouses, or streetscapes, they seem to allude to the marks that we leave on the land and the relationship between us and the environment that we inhabit. Having studied architecture at UCD, Susan worked for 15 years with Arthur Gibney and Partners, where she worked on projects ranging from new builds to conservation architecture. It is clear that her years spent studying buildings and their impact on the world around them is as relevant to her art practice as it was to her practice as an architect. Structures, buildings, and the topography of a landscape are explored and situated in the context of their immediate environments. Susan found her way to printmaking at the Print Museum in Dublin and Airfield House, and in 2012 she became a member of Graphic Studio Dublin. Recent exhibitions include the Royal Hibernian Academy and the Royal Ulster Academy annual exhibitions, Kanreki at the Model in Sligo, and IMC at Nara, Japan, as well as in Europe, the USA, and Canada. Her work is in national and international collections, including the National Library, the OPW, the University of Limerick, and Fingal County Council. A native of Sutton, the sea and coastline around County Dublin have been a recurring and rich source of inspiration from which to create her detailed and subtle observations of the world around her. The sea features in many of Susan's prints, and often in exploring the coastline and its punctuations of lighthouses, towers, and buildings, she seems to be inviting us to contemplate our relationship to the sea and the shores of our island nation. The contrasting views and vistas of her Lighthouse series highlight these buildings and their importance, both historically and topographically. They make me think of journeys, travel, and our past. I love the simple poetry of prints like Leaving Dublin Port, alluding to lighthouses, not simply as geographical markers, but as markers of memory, the last point you may see when leaving Dublin Bay. This series of lighthouses is one which Susan has been working on for years, and I hope to hear a bit about how the project has evolved. She plans to produce a collection of lighthouse etchings from the east and west coasts of the Atlantic Ocean. By working on a series like this, slowly adding to the collection, the lighthouses gain meaning beyond depicting their views and perspectives in the landscape. They prompt us to think of our history, our geographical place in the world, and the connections and distances between us. Susan's etchings are built up of layers of delicate aquatint, creating soft tones which are inked up a la poupée from one plate. I hope Susan will have time to talk a bit about how she makes these works and the journey of each piece from drawing to finished print. Recently, she has been scaling up her prints to create a series of large panoramic views of Dublin Bay, again drawing our attention to the lie of the land, how the landscape unfolds before us, and playing around with the shifting of perspectives, how the view changes depending on where we are standing. I would love to hear about these large panoramas and the challenges of making an etching that is 1.5 meters long. During the lockdowns over the past 2 years, without access to the print studio, Susan gave us a great insight into her research process. Daily walks were documented and posted on Instagram, marking out the many walking routes, parks, and rivers around her home. These visual diaries became a way of marking time, noticing the myriad details that surround us in a city, providing source material for new work, and also creating a record of this strange time where we were restricted to 2 or 5 kilometers from our home. Not willing to forego printmaking entirely during these months of restrictions, Susan also engaged with mokuhanga, traditional Japanese woodblock printing. It has been a delight to see Susan developing this technique as a part of her practice, exploring the landscape through bold graphic marks carved into wood and inked up in a subtle range of tones using watercolours. I hope there will be time to talk about future plans and projects, which coasts and shorelines Susan has set her sights on now. She may even be able to answer the age-old question, which coast is the best, east or west? So welcome, Susan, and over to you.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining us here today, and thanks to Niamh for writing my script for me. If she'd given me that earlier now, it would have been handy. Anyway, we're lucky we've lots of images to run through. So I do have a love of the coast and of the sea. I grew up on the Howth Peninsula with the sea all around us, and it's probably something that you have ingrained in you if you grow up by the sea. It's kind of, it's always there, always in the background. I couldn't imagine living too far away from it. And I was always drawing, always making things. There was an awful lot of that going on in our house at home. And it just became part of kind of what you do. I went on then to study architecture in UCD. Again, it was something that appealed to me, the design end of it, but also the drawing skills end. And when I look back, I did a project while in college based on lighthouses. And I think that was one of the things that kind of set up an interest in it. And this was one of the old blueprints that I got from the Irish Lights of the Fastnet Lighthouse. And it really intrigued me, both the way that the building was built, where it was built, all the interlocking stones, the fact it's handmade, but also the kind of the drawing and the representation of that lighthouse as something quite unique and different and a very specialized form of construction. I went on then obviously to work on other stuff. Drawing skills were a really important part of the course at the time. There was no computer aided design, everything was hand drawn. So you really developed up your skills drawing in pencil and in pen, and planning work and planning how you would represent what you were trying to show as a drawing and as a beautiful drawing. And that's something that kind of really appealed to me. I love the drawing part. This was a project of the casino at Marino, which is an exquisite little building in Dublin that I still love. And then I went on to work for almost 15 years with Arthur Gibney and Partners. We were based in an old Georgian building in Harcourt Street. And I was delighted about 10 years ago to be commissioned as they were moving out of that building to make it a little series of etchings and prints for long-term clients and long-term staff of the company. And it's something that really is kind of a part of, you know, what you're familiar with. Those old brick Georgian buildings, among a whole street of old brick Georgian buildings, they're all slightly different. But the detail and the kind of experience of working your way through it and understanding the kind of the legacy of a building like that is really quite unique and quite part of, I think, what we all are, whether we're aware of it or not. I worked on a series of mix of buildings, from a lot of university buildings in DCU to health buildings to a little bit of conservation, again, of Georgian buildings and the Gresham Hotel there, and then moved on to working with another firm as joint partners, developing up a really contemporary modern building, which became the headquarters of Kildare County Council. After that time, I left. We went off to spend a year in Holland. So I never actually went back to work with the directly as an architect. But Arthur Gibney himself was very inspiring, as was other work we were doing in the practice at the time. But Arthur's work with the beautiful hand-drawn pencil drawings and watercolors was always something that interested me. He was president of the RHA at the time, and we were working in the office on the development of the RHA building. He gave me this drawing, which I had in my house, and realised years later when Gráinne Cuff walked in and said, "Oh, I worked with Arthur on that as a litho." At the time, I had no idea it was a lithograph or what a lithograph was, but it's interesting the connection that comes up. From there, I after our year or so in Holland, I decided I'd really like to try printmaking myself. Did a couple of weekend courses with Gráinne Dowling down in the Print Museum, and then some courses with her in Airfield Print Studio. And I have to say, she just instilled a love of printmaking. We went through so many, in such a short space of time, thinking back, so many different techniques, options, you know, the experience of ways you could work things. This was a little sugar lift tree that we tried, or I tried down, based on a tree down in the scanner. And then developed up a couple of other prints. Again, something that I realize now looking back, a lot of it was to do with structures in the landscape. So we would have spent time with my sister down in Clare, and we would have spent a lot of time up in Sligo. And these were just two images that I'd be familiar with, but they are very much rooted back into their kind of landscape and how they landed there, what kind of landscape they were in. Technique-wise, again, it was kind of experimenting with a hard ground line, and the lighthouse one here with aquatint over, and the little dolmen one was just pure aquatint. I then went on to kind of, okay, I'm going to try a couple of very architectural little series of prints of Holt Village, which were all done with soft ground, with aquatint, and a colour palette, which I've kind of developed and haven't moved all that far away from. So they're the very architectural end of things. I don't tend to do that much kind of streetscape now, but they were very much a kind of a sense of a village with a unique kind of topography that I would have been very familiar with, and something I would have grown up with, which is kind of nice to have represented there. I did refer back to architecture over the years, and again, the Georgian buildings appeal. The one on the left there is Rathmines Church, that again, one of my favourite domes in Dublin. That is kind of pivoted back in the middle of a block there. So you're coming up Camden Street, you see it. You're going up or down Rathmines, you see it. Around by Ranelagh, you see it. And again, it's kind of the focus of something very definite within its context, within the context of built up urban Dublin. And the Georgian doors, which again, something that always interests me, the intricacy of the detail, the light and shade, how they just fit into their local environment. Working with brickwork was something that I experimented with on the right-hand side, which is an old doorway number 3, Henrietta Street, which was part of our an exhibition that we held. This building has been totally restored now. And it's interesting to go back and see it as a kind of completely tarted up new building. But I love doing the brickwork and that, and I did come back to that again. I reverted to a large degree back again to the sea, to local environment, places I would be familiar and grew up with. And this was a very simple little aquatint only etching that kind of gave me the effect of what I really like to do, to work without a line, just with tones, a bit of colour, kind of emphasising certain aspects of it. So this is down on the Borough Beach, which we would have gone to as kids for years and would still kind of regularly go out to. I also kept going with a little bit of dry point. It suited me at the time not to have to go to the studio and not to have to work always with aquatint and be dipping in and out. So the dry point is something that is in a kind of a very detailed, again, back to drawing process that I liked, and I'd still do a little bit of that every so often. Trees and where they are in the landscape. This is in the edge of Glencar Lake near the waterfall there. The one on the left there is up in the Brickleave Mountains, again in Sligo, which we spent a lot of time there over the years. And the one on the right was Connemara, based on travels as a family, as children. But again, they're just the effect of something natural held into its topographic landscape and how the wind affects it, what will grow, what won't grow, what grows around it, all really interests me. And I ended up in graphic studio back in 2012, which again is, we're based in a lovely old Victorian brewery building. And this was a little plate that I made for presentation. It kind of reflects where my printmaking usually ends up, which is to make a plate, a single plate with all the detail on it, very little line or no line, but outlines might be kind of worked on through the aquatint that I apply. It makes for very pretty little final plates because it has all the detail on it. And it's how I usually work in the studio. This was a little series of small 10 by 10 plates. This is just some of them, which I made as part of the Holt Chamber Music group. And I was involved in a team. Now, I wasn't in the musical end of the team now, but involved in a team that put on regular concerts. And I used to do the graphics and got commissioned to do a little series of a new print for every concert that were presented to the musicians, which was very nice. But it really made me look at Holt, mainly Holt and Bailey Lighthouse in all sorts of contexts, from the sea, from the port, from the land. It wasn't just Holt that I worked with. This was back down to Clare, where we used to, as I say, visit my sister a lot. The little Black Rock lighthouse there on the Burren landscape is a kind of a prime example of locating a structure where it needs to be for practical purposes for sailors and those at sea, and it just has to work within where it needs to go, and structurally, engineering wise, as with all lighthouses, it's really quite dramatic. Again, a series of small little 10 by 10 aquatints. I'm back up to Sligo, where I have really fond kind of connections. Ben Bulbin, Lissadell, Oyster Island is somewhere. That's the entrance into Sligo Bay, the route into the port, which is quiet now, but would have been very, very busy as a northwestern port in its day. And the one on the left is a kind of a less known lighthouse on its timber pedestal at the entrance into Lissadell Bay. I love the way that sits down in the sand, again, where it needs to be, and you make it work, make the structure work to make the lighthouse work. Another little series of them. These are all up in the northwest. Some of these are much more recent. Black Rock Lighthouse, Rotten Island, I love the name of that, which is at the entrance into Killybegs, which is again just set on a rock and is the kind of port access for one of the biggest fishing ports on the west coast of Ireland. And down the left is St. John's Point, which is out in the peninsula, which is an outer marker, a guide into Killybegs Lighthouse. Again, it sits on the edge of a very long, one of the longest peninsulas in Europe, but it's got a big hilly landscape to it, and the walls around the lighthouse that kind of emphasize the or that form the place of the whole lighthouse complex. Let's say the walls curve up and down and around and follow the landscape there, which is really interesting. As far as my lighthouses go, and that isn't all I do now, but it is a kind of an ongoing, long-term kind of plan. I thought I'd done loads of lighthouses around Ireland, but when you go and plot them on a map, you realise, okay, the red ones are ones I've made prints of. The blue ones are areas that I've visited in the last few years and are kind of ready to go. I have them there. But I haven't made them yet. But there's a lot of the rest of Ireland that I have to do, or at least visit. I don't tend to make a print of anywhere that I don't know myself. I think the identity of where somewhere is in the landscape has to be kind of experienced to get the sense of place, the environment, the location. So I'm not interested in making prints from other people's photos or images that you find online. I like to go and experience and find a place myself. Niamh referred to the Atlantic Ocean there on the left. I have a residency which was disrupted by COVID, but which I hope maybe to do next year over in near Boston, where I'll start and discover a couple of little New England lighthouses over around Cape Cod, and maybe start a bit of a process whereby I can visit West Coast, West Atlantic lighthouses. I might even, as I was drawing this little map, have to pay a visit down to Portugal, or maybe the Azores, Madeira. Some of those might be an interesting excuse to go and visit. Newfoundland too. And as I say, you know, a sense of where you are and kind of recording where you visit and where you're familiar with and what jumps out at you as the main kind of criteria or markers in any landscape. This is up again, Oyster Island, the entrance into Sligo Bay. So you've got the lighthouse, you've got the pilot houses on the island, you've got the field structures, you've got the view across over to Knocknarea, and you've Queen Maeve there on the very top of Knocknarea, which again is a very nice place to live. It's her residence, let's say, on the top of a hill in the landscape. Down to Loop Head in County Clare, and this was a print that was made by a bride who wanted to present it to her husband on their wedding day. She used French, and as part of a traditional French custom that you present something to your groom, and in this case he had proposed to her at Loop Head, so that's why she particularly asked for Loop Head Lighthouse. Back up to Sligo again, this was a legacy exhibition held in the Hamilton, or in the Hyde Bridge Gallery, set up by Martina Hamilton. They were done in the style of Coola Press, which again our studio and our kind of founding members would have had kind of strong connections with. So that's the Metal Man, which again is a marker in Sligo Bay, pointing you which side of the rocks to veer towards. And the other is up the little tree on the side of Knocknarea. And further up the coast in Sligo, again, the rock structure and the geology of this part of kind of northwest Sligo is really intriguing. All those strata of kind of rocks at an angle, and then on the top of it you've got this kind of romantic castle owned by Lord Mountbatten in its time, just sitting there on the top of the hillside with the background of with Ben Bulbin in the distance behind. And then back to Dublin Bay. lighthouses all around, forming a very strong function. Strong function kind of heading into the port. The little dotted line there on the left is the, roughly the kind of the shipping route into Dublin port, and all the various markers on the way, the Kish, the Bailey, the little green ones that you keep to the left of in non-nautical terms, and the route out into the middle of the bay, which of course was something that so many people discovered over lockdown, which is quite interesting. That little red lighthouse that is visible from all around the bay. Again, I did a little series of lighthouses along this route into the bay called Leaving Dublin Port. So it's as you're sailing in or you're sailing out of Dublin Port, these are the markers that you have to sail between. Poolbeg, obviously, at the end of the pier, at the end of the south wall. And then as you go further out, you get the Bailey and the Kish. The North Wall, the North Bank, and the North Bull are all the lighthouses that are more kind of into the port. I think Dublin Bay and Dublin Port is so interesting. I think it's just so interesting to have as kind of a central focus for Dubliners. The port, everything just kind of swings around the port, and it's the other items or the other elements that are there that of course we're so familiar with are the Poolbeg chimneys, and that's something else that really interests me, both as a kind of a man-made structure put there very much for a purpose, but they have become part of the kind of environment that we are all so familiar with. No matter what side of the bay you're going, from Howth, you're going right around into the city, you're going right around the south side, you're going to the mountains above, and the chimneys are always there, almost like a pivot or an anchor to the city. This is one I really enjoyed doing now, because you were zooming right in, and the amount of people who said to me that they never realised there were ladders and balconies and access up the outside of the Poolbeg. And it's a kind of a detailed view of this. Again, the single plate there in the centre just shows how dramatic it can be to work on a single plate of just aquatint. So there's no line on any of these. Any of the darker marks are just made by toning up to either side of it. There would be about 10 tones of aquatint on this plate, about 10 dips, and the texture and the outlines and the main structure lines and the shadows are all made by just aquatinting. Just a lovely little COVID project, which was held by the Print Club Torino in Italy, and they invited people around Europe to submit a little drawing, and they made the most exquisite little laser printed woodcuts of everybody's drawing and sent them out to you then. So I love this. I'm never going to apply ink to it, it's too nice on its own. And some more again of the chimneys, you know, visible from all sides, but I particularly love that tall, thin slice with the Poolbeg Yacht Club in front. So you're getting all the vertical mass, you're getting the industrial cranes behind, and then you're getting the Poolbeg chimneys behind that. South side, because we have to talk south side too. I grew up on the north side on Howth, and now live around the south side, and I do a lot of delivering, collecting to yacht clubs in Dunleary over the last 10 years. So I'd be just as familiar with the East Pier and the West Pier in Dunleary, the Muglands and Dalkey, Kish in the distance, and all the boats and the activity that happens in the bay that comes from the port out through to the greater Irish Sea, but also the kind of more recreational sailing that's in and out of bays all over the place. And just a little sketch up on the left of the Irish Lights building on a very nice sunny day, which is a lovely structure in itself. And this is just going back then to something more detailed. Fingal worked with us as part of our Graphics Studio Dublin 60th anniversary and invited Fingal artists to take part, and Fingal artists from Graphics Studio to host an exhibition. They hosted an exhibition out in Riocht, and I just focused in on two of my favourite Fingal lighthouses and just looked at them in kind of more detail, slightly more graphic detail, but really fixing again where they are, the Bailey on the side of the cliff and Hoth Lighthouse on the end of the pier, and very kind of looks a more secure structure, but you can get huge waves and wind and that up over it as well. And to northwest, up to Donegal, again, they just emphasize the beauty of a copper plate and how applying the ink in layers and wiping between each layer and carefully applying a la poupée the different colours of ink on a single plate and then just pulling it off in a single pull on the press. And it's quite exhilarating sometimes to pull off your first print in black and white and then your first print in colour and just realise, yes, this works in a single pull, which is very nice. I did move into Makahanga a little again. I got a Dún Laoghaire Down Creative Ireland bursary and was very privileged and delighted to be working with Kate McDonough on something that I had never done before. So this is Makahanga, Japanese water-based woodblock technique, carved into the wood. I had to, again, simplify down. I wasn't going to get my 10 variations of aquatint on this, so it's simplified down, overlaying, reprinting and reprinting and reprinting until you get the kind of the texture and the color and the blending that you like. So again, that's back to the Bailey I'm familiar with and Strida Beach up in Sligo again, but just ways of developing a completely different technique. I also worked on our red prints, which was Canrecki, which was another 60th anniversary exhibition in Makahanga. So I have 3 blocks on this with the red. Red is a 60 theme in Japanese, celebrating a 60th anniversary. So all the prints in this all had a red theme. So I worked on the red lighthouse and presented that. So really interesting. A lot of that was done over COVID and a lot of it could have been done at home or was done at home. And we got the opportunity then to exhibit that both in the model in Sligo and then over in Japan. Unfortunately, we weren't able to go and visit, but we did have a fantastic kind of presentation and really delighted to be part of that. And not all my prints are red or sea-based, sea colours. This was a little one for our Green Hills that we worked on for the Simon community last year for our exhibition of the art of home. And again, I just say that working in a studio is of huge value and has to be of huge value. You learn so much from other people, you get the opportunities, you get the experience, the atmosphere, the encouragement of working on a series of prints of all sorts of media that all get presented in a single exhibition, and it's quite exciting. It's nice. I have developed a series of panoramas across Dublin Bay then. These ones are about 50 centimetres long. They're looking across the bay, the top one from Bailey, looking over towards Brayhead and the Sugarloaf and Dalkey Island. And then one from the south, looking from Dunleary, from kind of above the harbour, looking towards the East Pier and over to Howth. And again, you know, I'm so familiar with looking from the other side southwards. It's really interesting to locate markers and places. And even I do a lot of photography and a lot of zoomed in long lens photography, so you can actually identify roads and routes and that kind of thing that you're familiar with, and across the bay. And then another two, which were looking down at the Martello Tower Sea Point with the skyline and the profiles of Dublin City behind, and then looking the other direction from kind of Sandymount towards Dunleary, and again you're getting Killiney Hill right down through the profile of a very busy town, and then out towards the kind of the more recreational port, representing the sea and the mud and the tide in and out and all is just something that's always changing. And I decided over the last year or so that I'd like to try and do that on a much bigger scale. So this is a much bigger, longer panorama, which I've split into two. So it's made as part of a diptych, two plates that are easier to manage, but can be hung and framed together. This is it down in Graphic Studio Dublin as part of the Moore show. It's took much longer than I thought. Just the scaling up of anything takes much longer. But again, I would have an awful lot of detail in this. So sorry, it's some of the detail of the plants in the foreground, the gorse, you know, kind of again, what forms kind of the character of a view. And some of the planning that will be involved in putting together prints like this, identifying again just the long view through, and what are the main elements that have to be included and definitely represented, what's in the foreground, what's in the background, how you work the sea before it, and other ideas of long panoramas. In fact, the next one I'm going to do isn't included there. It's going to be from up above Step Aside. So again, as I say, Dublin Bay with the mountains all around it, you get these high level views looking down and across, which is really unique and very nice as a city. And Martello Towers are something along the same line. I mean, there was a whole string of these put up when we were worried, or when the British were worried about Napoleon invading. So this is the tower at Sea Point, which lots of you I know swim at and would be very familiar with on the Dart line. And I mean, there are 3-story structures. There's a whole roof level with the cannon with the gun on it. There are 2 living levels, there's a main living level inside and a level for kind of living and storage down below. And there were a whole series of these built up and down the coast, mainly around Dublin on the east coast there. And each one was visible from the next Martello Tower to be able to pass signals if there was a worry about people sailing in. So again, it's just a way of kind of sketching and representing what's there with the skyline behind, the boats running through. The Martello at Sea Point is pictured from the West Pier in Dunleary. So you're actually seeing the kind of the structure of the town and the coast, and what would have been country residences originally built around as a backdrop to the Martello Tower here. And finally, this is the other Martello Tower that I have proofed but haven't got any further. Hopefully I will in the next week or two. And this is the Martello at Sandy Cove, which is the James Joyce Museum now. And it's where the very first, in this centenary year, where the very first chapter of James Joyce of Ulysses started off from. This is one I want to develop. It looks really good in tones and black and whites, but in fact, there's a whole series of colour kind of strata that I I want to kind of to show from the greeny seaweed down the bottom to the rocks in the shade and the rocks in the light, and then the tower above and the sky up above. And that's really it. Little boat aquatint there. And just also like to mention, it's very important to say that artists are supported by councils and the Arts Council, and grants can make all the difference to giving you time to do your work and being able to develop it. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Susan. That was amazing. Really, really lovely talk. Fantastic to see all the work together. And also what I really enjoyed looking at was all of your plans and the process shots. I mean, I think that's really insightful to be able to see them. And it made me think actually that, like, I'm surprised we don't have more architects turning into printmakers, because like a lot of the time we get, you know, painters that become printmakers, and like you can see them struggling because planning is so different from painting to print. But actually I wonder, did you find that your background in architecture kind of helped you work as a printmaker? Because there's so much planning involved in making etchings.
There is. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of planning involved in etching, and I suppose we all bring what we do in the past into the present, and how to make our prints. But certainly looking at context, observation. As an architect, you know, everything you work on is based on how it sits into the kind of environment and the context it's in. And as a kind of a principle, as I'm developing my printmaking and the subject matter, that would certainly come in.
Yeah.
Experience of working as an architect, yes. The planning, definitely. The project management for other work I do certainly comes into fore. And I'm always surprised we don't have more architects, because I think the whole process of planning stages in a print is something that you're planning your drawings, you're planning how to set them out, how to present them to people, how a building will be constructed as against how a print is built up and developed and made. And most architects have a kind of an inbuilt, well, certainly most up to when I qualified would have been very much kind of pencil and pen based. Now there's so much more computers there that they're not as, I suspect a lot of them aren't as kind of experienced or natural with a pencil and their drawing. But yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. We should do a call out, survey some architects.
We should.
Why aren't they making prints?
We do have architects who do courses with us, and every time they come up with something amazing. But I think architects tend to be so busy, so interested in so many things around them that they get distracted to try something else.
Yeah, cool. Anyone, any questions, guys?
Yeah, so I just want to say that was gorgeous, Susan. Thanks so much. But what I felt from it, and maybe this is something you're bringing in from the way you draw, is the feeling of that these are spaces and not just, you know, when we say there isn't line. And I think that's why your pieces have this feeling that this is a space that has been put in here into another space, and not something that's flat on the landscape. It's really wonderful to look at. Thank you very much.
Well, that's very interesting, Ruth. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And it's something too that you're forming edges. You're forming edges and kind of tones one against the other, and light and shade one against the other, without having drawn it out first. Yeah.
So the feeling of volume is what makes your things. Then it's great. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
Kieran.
Susan, how important is the sketching process to the final realization of the print? I mean, are you using that always and essentially?
I would use it to get the feel for it. I would use it to kind of set out the image very much for the, how the image will appear on the plate, how the image will appear finally, what I want included in it and what I want emphasized in it. And as I go along, because I don't have that hard ground line to work within, I would refer back to the sketch, and I would refer to photographs a lot, and but it tends to take over. By the time I'm halfway through, I've kind of lost the kind of the guidelines on the plate or whatever, and the number of stops, and I would kind of work instinctively once I'm kind of set up and it's halfway through. So certainly the last 3 or 4 stops are usually kind of quite instinctive as to what I'm stopping out, what's getting darker, what's staying the same. Yeah.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Kate.
That was great. Fantastic. Moving from east to west was beautiful to see all the work continue throughout. And the blueprints that you showed there of Fastnet, I just wondered, it was a lithograph, did you say?
No, that wasn't a lithograph. I think they were just printed off from their original, from their kind of the drawing stock, let's say, of all their lighthouses. And again, that would have been back in a day where nothing was digitized, and they literally had everything on microfilm, and they were printed off those Forney. That was Irish Lights did it at the time.
Right.
So yeah.
Great. Well done. Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hey, Susan. Just hey, really enjoyed that. Thanks so much. And it was one thing that really struck me that I obviously has occurred to me every time I see your prints, but it's the light to me in yours. It's like that's what you're depicting more than the space. To me, I just see how the light interacts with everything, you know, and you mentioned light so many times today. I'm just going light bulb moment that it's and that's so integral to architecture, isn't it? That whole attitude to the light and the play of light and everything. And
it is, and how a building, you know, how a building is situated, and your orientation and your external space and how you want it all to work within its context. Yes, it is actually, yeah. So you would be very, very concerned or very kind of conscious of kind of light areas, dark areas, and yeah, it would always be something. And I think, again, because I'm working tone on tone, and you don't have that line to divide things, that you have to build up a kind of a light and dark contrast. Yeah.
Yeah, super.
I have a question for you, Susan.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, because you were talking about kind of being, you know, being a member of the studio and how that kind of impacts your work and being part of a collective. And I'm just wondering, is there a flip side to that? Because you're a really active member, but you're also doing a massive role in the studio as an employee. And do you find that ever kind of impacts on your practice as an artist? Like, do you find it difficult to balance the two?
Yes, I'd prefer to have more time making art and less time managing other stuff, let's say. And I think, you know, that happens. That's just life cycle of how you move through life, and you're doing different things. It does affect it in that I wouldn't have as much time to spend on making work as I would like. But there are, you know, other bits that I really enjoy. I mean, I enjoy managing exhibitions and creating opportunities for other people and people working together, and really enjoy the kind of generally the atmosphere within the studio, and how we all work together and learn from each other. Yeah. I think it's quite important. I think it's a bit unique. Sorry, I think it's a bit unique as printmakers that really has to be part of your practice, because so much of your printmaking can only be done in an area where it's safe and you have the materials and the equipment and the technical expertise to produce your work. So you really have to engage with others and be involved with others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Niamh, can I just add in there, as current chair of the board, I just want to acknowledge, in case anybody attending here is under any other illusion, the astonishing work that Susan does on behalf of Graphic Studio, and just to publicly thank her for it, because it really is invaluable to the stable progress of where graphic is going.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kieran. That's really nice of you to
Thank you,
say, and
Kieran.
really
Also,
important to say, because I think actually nobody, unless they're working really closely with you, Susan, realizes exactly how much. Like I said, I don't know how you do it, but I really don't know how you do it.
Definitely.
Like, you know, you're brilliant at juggling. I see you coming in and you dip a plate in the acid and you do a meeting, and you know, but I still don't understand, because there's still only 24 hours in your day as well as mine.
I just have to say we really are privileged to have the incredible commitment and efficient brilliance of what you do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Here.
Can I ask a quick question? Thanks a lot, Susan. It was a fabulous presentation. And as a sailor, I really appreciate lighthouses from the sea side of things. But I was just wondering, do you have any particular artists that influence your work? Like I'm thinking of perhaps Winslow Homer or people like that tend to do structures like lighthouses, and or do you have a very diverse interest in the world of art?
I would have a fairly diverse interest, as you say. I mean, I'd admire seascapes. I love Donald Teskey's stuff, I have to say. And I mean, I love the area, a lot of, you know, where he and a lot of the area that he works on up in the Northwest Coast would be kind of familiar with the kind of places that I would engage with and really respond to. I enjoy generally artists and seascapes, and I will pay attention to anyone who's doing work like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Super.
And I'm sure a lot of that was very familiar to you, Paul. a lot of the Holt stuff as well.
Absolutely, yeah, it's fabulous. Really lovely work. I really love it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Susan, thank you so much. That was absolutely beautiful, fantastic,
Brilliant,
and
great,
inspirational. So
thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone for
Susan.
coming along.
Yep.
Right.
thank you,
Brilliant.
Niamh, for yet another brilliant presentation.
Pleasure. Okay. Slán, everyone.
Thanks.